But first off, I'm Samantha. I work with Tito's Handmade Vodka. Thank you for all of the support. We really appreciate it. And I'm humbled and honored today to help introduce our first speaker. She is extremely well connected in Colorado. Most of you know her, many of you know her well. In 1977, she helped co-found the Westword, where she helped hire the very first food critic almost 40 years ago. And she still remains extremely integral into all food journalism. She's been involved on a national level and a local level with food journalism. Also very boldly and iconically, this is something I found really awesome, was she interviewed Bill Clinton in a pair of flip-flops. She's recognized and honored for numerous national awards for her columns and feature writings. So please help me welcome Patty Calhoun for her talk titled, "Don't Poison the Critic, the Care and Feeding of Food Journalists."
Okay, no slap and no flip-flops. I was supposed to go last, which was exciting because I thought I would just be able to make fun of everyone who'd gone before me. And now they get to make fun of me, and I'm gonna have to go with this set speech, which will probably give them a lot of material. So my apologies, and especially as I used my glasses, whoa. Okay. As I used my glasses like a garage door opener through this speech. Because seeing all of you is, first of all, great, and it reminds me of so many humiliations in my life that I will probably need to share with you, and those aren't yet in the script. We go to restaurants for so much more than a meal. We hunger for more than food. Sometimes we want an adventure, sometimes we crave comfort. Sometimes we just want to go to a place that feels more like home than our own home, where I just found some eggs that were a year old, by the way. And thank you, Los Dos Patrios, one of my homes away from home. To flip that over, food journalism is about so much more than restaurant reviews. While thinking about this talk, I went with some restaurant pals to a very old bar on South Broadway, the kind of place you've probably been driving by for decades. I once asked a friend who'd grown up in Littleton and whose father was the sheriff what was the worst bar in Littleton, and he told me to go there, but he'd never been there. As it turned out, the Castle was a really great spot, if you've been there. Great burgers, good camaraderie, and we sat around and talked about the talk and restaurants and whether the new guy on Bridgerton is hot and whether you should darn socks. And it was exactly what you want from some nights at a restaurant. The Castle is a place you want to read about, you want to know about, but maybe it's not a place that cries out for a review, even if its burgers are great. And last night, after I thought I'd finished this talk to go last, I had an impromptu dinner at the Ponte, the new restaurant at the Denver Art Museum. And looking across the rain-swept city, I felt like Denver was going on a new adventure. Downtown Denver is not dead, by the way. No matter what talk show hosts and headlines might say, I've been eating and drinking my way around downtown for 2 years. And it's ready for people to go out again. It feels like a place to explore. And while most people have read about the Ponte, and we've written about the Ponte, I think now maybe there's more that people should know. They maybe should even read a restaurant review when we're ready for those again. Like everything else, the world of, just checking to see if I have my pages in order, sorry. Like everything else, the world of food journalism has been upended over the last 2 years. Unlike some places, it was already changing drastically before the pandemic. When we started Westword over 40 years ago, a big night on the town was to go to the broker to get a steak and that free bowl of horrible shrimp. Or you could try one of those newfangled fern bars like Zach's, and occasionally we'd go to the Saucy Noodle where my original partner had worked because he loved the fried ravioli named after Maury Amsterdam. Despite the lack of really groundbreaking restaurants, the city was lousy with highfalutin restaurant reviewers who always sounded too big for their britches and often were. The rest of Denver's food coverage consisted mainly of service pieces and recipes in those big Wednesday food sections in the dailies. Bill St. John, if you're here, I know you remember when the Denver Post ran the Helen Dolligan recipe for the apricot chicken that wound up exploding in ovens across Denver because there was too much brandy in the recipe. It was a great journalistic moment. The Post had to replace several ovens. In the early days, our food coverage focused on restaurant reviews, like most, and the occasional mockery of Casa Bonita. We've had a series of food reviewers over the past 4 decades, some more successful than others, all people, I hope, with high ethical standards. One was bulimic before we knew the realities of the disease, and I had to go with her to her meals so she would leave the restaurant before she enjoyed it a second time. Another was the beloved John Kessler, a recent transplant to Denver, who'd never written a restaurant review until he submitted a sample to us. And it was a revelation of what a good restaurant review could be. A lot of history about the kind of food, great descriptions of Colfax. If you can't do a great description of Colfax, you're in trouble. And a really smart assessment of the actual meal. I'd hired him by the first page, and you've heard from him here. Was he the first one? First Ed Talk? Another was Kyle Wagner, who was notoriously allergic to dill. And a jar of the stuff was delivered to the office by John Imbergamo, who's not here, after a negative but completely fair review. Another negative review of a steakhouse, where she went with the legendary Barry Fay, prompted a call from a certain restaurant trade association official, who I don't think is here, who said the owner of the steakhouse was complaining that Fay's son managed the restaurant, so it was unfair to do the review. Fay's son was 6 years old at the time. But here's a sign of how much the scene has changed. When Kyle was working on our Best of Denver issue 14 years ago, she could come up with only one restaurant that had opened that year that would qualify as a new best restaurant, and it didn't even have a kitchen. Now the restaurant scene after that started exploding like Helen Dolligan's apricot chicken. And right at the start of that, our restaurant critic was Jason Sheehan, a person people love to hate. He once inspired a late-night email from a restaurateur whose name might be Dave Query, which was almost as long as the Sheehan review and even more profane, if possible. Sheehan also once, the whole myth of the being anonymous as a food critic, we tried really hard to maintain that. Sheehan charged a beer when I was meeting him at Vesta Dipping Grill for a secret meeting. And Josh Woken, bless your heart, you didn't bust me when I kept introducing him as my cousin or something. Anyway, yeah, reviewers are not always smart. But Sheehan came at a time when restaurant reviewing, what food journalism was really changing. Anthony Bourdain was writing, as you know if you've read Sheehan. Cable news was filling up with food shows that were not just about French cooking. New culinary magazines were emerging. Food journalism now consisted of much more than pompous reviews and Wednesday recipes. It was entertainment, it was culture, it was rock and roll. It could be everything. Sheehan doubled our audience for food stories, mirroring audience growth around the country. The web provided more space for food writing, and reviews moved to a less prominent role. We wrote about openings, closing, food events, food feuds. The annual Best of Lists spawned weekly Best of Lists. People were hungry to know more, and we kept feeding them. There were still plenty of food writers fighting to be the first to get a story, and in some cases, holding restaurateurs and their PR people hostage, and I know some of you are here. At one point, we actually had a summit of food writers to talk about it and to ramp down on the so-called exclusives. If you solve a murder, you can put exclusive in a headline. If you're revealing an ongoing pattern of sexual harassment in a kitchen, and those stories were becoming all too common, you can put exclusive in a headline. If you browbeat a restaurateur into letting you break the story that he's opening a second location of a not good restaurant, you should not. Restaurateurs have a choice. They have some power in who they want to break a story. They do not have a choice of lying to others on the trail. A simple no comment will do, but it might ruffle some feathers. And we all know who has lied to us, but that's part of the deal. And here's a quick pro tip. I'm not saying sucking up doesn't work to the media. Restaurateurs who let food writers know they enjoyed a story that had nothing to do with their own business are just being smart. Even smarter is to tip a food writer off to a good story that has nothing to do with you. That wins you a lot more points than sending a basket of payola, especially since many newsrooms won't accept that if the newsrooms exist at all. Because the heated competition of the last decade has been drastically reduced. The gutting of newsrooms across the nation hit food reporting too. and then the pandemic, which further cut the ranks of journalists at a time when an industry needed them more than ever. What the restaurant industry doesn't need are reviews of whether a kitchen packaged its to-go offerings in a pleasant way. Right now, it needs stories about restaurant relief, about the mental health of workers, about the historic lack of attention to restaurateurs of color, and inspirational stories about the businesses that were able to survive and how. Now, as we head into the new normal, and Casa Bonita is suddenly not just the biggest story in this, is the biggest story in the city, not just a food story, is there still a seat at the table for criticism? Perhaps not for Casa Bonita, even though Dana Rodriguez has promised us that the food will be palatable. But what fun is that going to be? Westword hasn't had a restaurant critic since before the pandemic, and I'm not sure we ever will again. We would have to find the right person, and that's not easy. We cover the restaurant scene, of course. We publish three or so stories a day, thank you, Molly. And right before I came in here, I was editing a story about a new restaurant that opened in Park Hill, one that lets readers know why it opened so quickly, what they might want to order there. It's not a time to do a full-fledged review of that place, and the old rule of waiting a few months and eating a few meals should still hold. But in these days of supply chain problems and short staffing, what amounts to a fair review? In the old days, if the service sucked on a few consecutive meals, a critic felt comfortable calling out the restaurant. In these new days, that no longer feels fair. At the very least, you need to call the restaurant to find out why. Did everyone call in sick? And if that favorite dish didn't taste the same, was it because the ingredients weren't available? But still, as I sat at the Ponte last night, I wondered what a great reviewer, someone who knows a lot more about food than I, would make of our meal. I wanted to know why Lebna tastes so good. Hell, I want to know how to pronounce it. I'm in the middle of judging the James Beard Awards for restaurant reviewers, and I know that even through the pandemic, some managed to do it well. Many did not. There's room at the table for a reviewer, but the reviewer has to bring something to the table. While you can't just blame Yelp, although it's really fun, and you can blame Yelp a lot for the destruction of criticism's reputation, you can't just blame Yelp. Yelp has made everyone think they can be a reviewer, and that's not the case. My fish was grilled to perfection, our waiter was a loser, this place sucks, blah, blah, blah. I feel for every one of you who has to chase down the damage done by Yelp. And of course, the damage we might do, but that's a different thing. But there's good news. Just as the internet has made it easy to spread rumors and untruths, it's also given you power with food journalists. In fact, you can survive without getting any review at all, much less a good one, or even just a story on that new deck you built, that new dish you've added. The web has given you the power to get the word out. You can send out an email blast, you can Facebook the news, you can put the new deck and dish on Instagram. And yes, you can still feed the media with the standard press release and photo via the web, or dish them up a good story. But if that story doesn't show up, or if you don't like the headline, please hold the dill.